Welcome to Preventing Harassment and Discrimination training. We have specifically customized this training for volunteers working with nonprofit organizations. My name is Tracy Aparo. I am a human resources professional with over 25 years of experience. My co-facilitator, Mike Kreitman, is an employment and labor attorney who has been practicing for over 25 years. Today's training will cover the law regarding discrimination and harassment in the organization you support, how to best prevent harassment and discrimination in your organization, the process for reporting concerns, and best practices to help shepherd a culture of respect within your organization. So why is it important that we talk about these topics? Your organization takes this very seriously and is committed to educating everyone within your organization. Your organization has committed to training everyone from the board of directors to staff to volunteers. It is important to understand expected behaviors as a volunteer and how to address and raise concerns early to prevent future problems. Ultimately, we all want to be appreciated and valued for the volunteer work that we do. A culture of respect and inclusion leads to healthy working relationships and an engaging volunteer experience. I'd now like to turn this over to Mike Kreitman. He will help us define and understand harassing and discriminatory behavior.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. So let's begin by defining discrimination. It means to treat a person differently or less favorably based on protected characteristics. And some examples of this, of protected characteristics, include an individual's age, race, religion, gender identity, disability, gender, national origin, veteran status. There's a whole category of these characteristics that the law protects, and what's illegal and against your organization's policy to treat an individual, an employee, a volunteer differently or less favorably based on these protected characteristics. Also within the law is harassment, and that's also prohibited by law. And harassment relates to verbal, physical, or visual conduct that is offensive and unwelcome, and we'll talk more about that. Sexual harassment is one specific type of harassment, and there's two categories within that: a hostile work environment, which relates to offensive and unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, and quid pro quo sexual harassment. That's a Latin term. You may have heard of this for that. And that relates to when whether or not a person accepts or rejects a request for sexual favors becomes the basis for the employment decision, also prohibited by state and federal law. Also prohibited is retaliation, which is a negative employment action because someone is involved in a complaint of harassment or discrimination. Okay, next slide. So hostile work environment, let's begin by talking about sexual hostile work environment. And that's defined as sexual advances or requests for sexual favors and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature that is, one, pervasive and severe in the workplace, and it has the effect of unreasonably interfering with someone's work performance because it creates an intimidating, a hostile, or a humiliating and sexually offensive work environment. In a nutshell, we could boil this definition down to unwelcome and offensive conduct of a sexual nature. And on the next slide, we have some examples of a hostile work environment, and it includes such things as sexual innuendos or jokes of a sexual nature, a person's discussions of his or her sexual activities, requests for sexual favors, offensive or provocative touching. And I think it's safe to say that almost always some type of touching is going to be problematic in the workplace. Sexually charged conversations, vulgar or crude emails or text messages, and sharing pictures of a sexual nature. All of these examples, I think what binds them with the common elements is that the behaviors, the conduct is tinged with this is more than just a casual joke or so. This is something that's very direct and will certainly fit into that category of offensive and unwelcome to many people. All right, next slide, Tracy. So when we talk about problematic behavior, here again some examples in terms of race or ethnic harassment. You could have racial or ethnic slurs. So, for example, use of the N-word or other type of slur based on someone's race or national origin. I can think of cases where an employee has complained that there was a picture of a noose in her workplace, or that there was some very offensive racist cartoons, pictures left on her desk. Invading someone's personal space, getting very close to or touching a person and getting into their personal space can make somebody feel uncomfortable and could be perceived as sexual harassment. Staring or leering. You've heard the term elevator eyes. If you look at someone up and down, or you just look at certain body parts when someone is talking to you, and that's going to be certainly viewed as offensive conduct. Ageism or generational stereotyping. This relates to comments, for example, oh, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, or let's not assign any kind of computer work to Bob. He's too slow at the task. Comments that again fit into that category of offensive, and in this case relate to someone's age. Asking for a date. Now that's an interesting one, because perhaps asking for a date once is not sexual harassment, most likely. But if you've been told no and you repeatedly ask for a date, then it fits into that category of pervasive, ongoing, and unwelcome conduct, because the person has already said no. Texting sexual innuendos. There's this notion, and I've heard this, where people say, well, it's my own cell phone, and I was texting to a coworker, someone else in the workplace, using to their own cell phone. So why? And it was on our own time even. It was not on work time. So why is that problematic? And the important takeaway here is that when the conduct involves two people who work in the same organization, inevitably, even if it occurs outside of work, and even if it's their own personal device, is not an organization supplied device, it is among coworkers, and it will seep back into the workplace. So the focus here is not on when it's done or what kind of device it's done and who owns the device, but it's the conduct itself that we need to focus on, that is both problematic under the law and which your organization prohibits. There's the other box here. Oh, I'm sorry, go back one, Tracy. The other box of humor and jokes. The law is not a speech code, and certainly an organization is not trying to make the workplace, what's the term, sterile or boring. We spend a lot of time as a volunteer dedicating ourselves to the work that we do. But it becomes problematic when it's those kinds of jokes that are offensive, that have a stereotype or a slur, and when they reach that level of offensiveness, that it becomes problematic. All right, next slide. There are some excuses that people offer when engaging in conduct that's offensive, unwelcome. and would constitute harassment. And while they might be excuses and might work in some situations, legally, these are not defenses or excuses to engage in the kind of conduct that we're talking about today. So one excuse, well, I didn't intend to offend anyone. The law really doesn't focus on a person's intent. It really focuses on whether or not the conduct would offend a reasonable person. Is a reasonable person standard. And while you may not have intended to offend anyone, if the conduct meets that standard of unwelcome, offensive, then the conduct is problematic. Everyone was doing it, so I thought it was okay. Don't be taken in by that, and certainly don't participate just because others are doing something. It doesn't make it right, just because people are doing it. In fact, it's even more problematic, and that's when an obligation to, or it's important to report misconduct to the organization. But just because everyone's doing it is not an excuse for someone to participate in it. Another common excuse, no one complained, so I thought it was okay to do it. Well, there may be many reasons why people don't complain. Perhaps those engaging in the misconduct is a friend or a neighbor or someone you've worked with or known for a long time, and you're not comfortable complaining, or perhaps so there's a fear of retaliation. Could be many reasons, but just because someone doesn't complain doesn't mean conduct is proper and appropriate. We're all very friendly. We let our guard down around each other. Kind of perhaps related to I didn't intend or mean to offend someone. One could be very friendly outside of work with your friends, your peers, your neighbors. But the workplace, your organization, it's a professional environment, and sometimes being overly friendly and letting you and could is not an excuse to engage in conduct that's prohibited by the organization and the law. It was off premise. I think I mentioned this earlier. That really isn't an excuse. If the conduct involves a coworker or co-volunteer in the organization, it's going to seep into the workplace. It's going to affect relationships, and it's problematic. And then saying that, well, conduct was directed to a third party, but not an employee. Again, it's not an excuse. The intent of the law is to prohibit this offensive, unwelcome, discriminatory, harassing conduct geared to volunteers, to coworkers, to third parties. So again, the takeaway from this slide is the focus is on the conduct, and we're talking about conduct you should avoid engaging in with fellow volunteers, with coworkers, or others in the organization. That's the focus of this training. All right, so a little activity. If you can just think about these, jot down some notes or give it a little bit of thought, and then let's answer the question, is this a hostile work environment? Do you need me to remove the lint from the back of your pants? I would say that is a problem. That is problematic, because the suggestion, the innuendo there is, I'm going to touch something. I'm going to touch you on the back of your pants. Put bluntly, I'm going to touch your butt to remove some lint. And that's offensive. It would be very different if you said, you have some material, you have a stain there on your pants, need to make you aware of it if you want to go look in the mirror. That's very different from saying, do you want me to remove the lint from the back of your pants? Can I touch you? And that certainly would, in my opinion, meet that category of offensive, unwelcome conduct. Another example, I'm not putting my video camera on for the Zoom call. Someone says that, and the response is, come on, let me see what you look like. Well, if the response was, I've never met you in person, and I'd like to meet you via video, that's a professional way of expressing something. But this is kind of more of a suggestion or an innuendo. It relates to someone's physical appearance. Let me see what you look like. And again, that could be so misinterpreted, and someone could take offense at a comment like that when put that way. Here's one. Patron greets an employee with a kiss on the cheek and a hug. Now, I said before that touching is almost always going to be viewed as problematic and inappropriate conduct. Now, there are people who hug when they see when they see somebody they know, and there's no ill intent. It might be cultural. Some cultures you can kiss on each cheek or you hug, and there are people who have been termed touchy-feely, they're huggers. There's some colleagues who I work with, and when I see them, I hug them. I've also known them for a long time. So the answer here is it could be. If you're meeting someone you don't know or so, going up to someone and kissing them on the cheek and hugging could be very inappropriate, very forward, and really out of place and unbusinesslike, and be viewed as very offensive and unwelcome. So it could be, it's context dependent, but a good rule of thumb for you would be to avoid engaging in that touching conduct, unless you really know the person and you know that this would be received well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so again, we talk about, is it a problem? Is the conduct inappropriate, prohibited in the workplace, and a violation of law? These are the key takeaways. The law utilizes an objective standard. Would a reasonable person be offended? What's improper is offensive, unwelcome conduct. A good rule of thumb is you don't know what will offend another person. You don't know what that person's, I call it the offense meter. What is that person's offense meter? When is he or she offended? So the best principle for you to guide your conduct by is act professional at all times. Given the objective standard, not knowing what will offend somebody else, just act professional, and no doubt you will stay out of trouble and not offend other volunteers or co-workers or persons in the organization. Okay, next slide. Okay, so another activity, is this rude, bullying behavior, discrimination or harassment, or is it just bad conduct? And if we go to the next slide, when we think about some conduct in the organization, and is it rude bullying? Is it improper, inappropriate? Is it illegal? Or it's just, it's just bad, perhaps bad interpersonal skills? There's a couple considerations. One is tone of voice. For example, if someone is rude or inappropriate to men and not women, or to minority employees but not Caucasian employees, then you're in that category of discrimination where you're treating people differently based on a protected characteristic. There might be people who are rude to just everybody, and again, that's not appropriate, it's not professional, it's not illegal, but it certainly isn't, the way to act in the workplace. Some conduct could be, someone could be impatient, and sometimes we see that, and it's more rude than it is harassing or discriminatory. Using chat or texting, I think a good rule of thumb is to always read an email or a text before you hit send, because you don't have the benefit of speaking where there's inflection or tone. And I've seen emails or texts, for example, that are in all caps that suggest anger or emphasis, and somebody just forgot to turn the all caps lock off. and that email in turn is misconstrued or either interpreted or misinterpreted as carrying a certain a message. Social media posts about someone at work, probably never a good idea. Certainly a social media account is your own personal account, but when you start posting about people who you engage with at work, you should be very cautious about that. Again, it could be conduct that seeps back into the workplace. So again, it's important here for you to be aware that here's different categories of conduct that may suggest offensive or unwelcome conduct, may just be rude or inappropriate. It's context dependent, but again, goes back to the importance of just acting professionally at all times. Okay.
Great, thanks, Mike. So we're now going to begin to talk about ways to prevent sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace. We all have a role that we play in preventing sexual harassment and discrimination, so we're going to share some tips with you on how to do that. So as a volunteer, how can you prevent sexual harassment and discrimination, or any kind of harassment for that matter? There are a couple of simple rules. First, just act respectfully and professional at all times. Respect others' beliefs and opinions, even when you disagree. There are some simple tips that we use here that I want to review a few with you. Don't ever make it personal. You might disagree with the person's values or beliefs. And when you have conversations with them, just try not to make it personal at all. Avoid putting down others' ideas and beliefs. That's critical. And when you talk with them, use I statements to reflect your views or things that you need. So as an example, you might say, I feel uncomfortable when religion is brought into the conversation. I'd rather not discuss this topic while we are volunteering or while we are at work. Those are some simple tips that you can use to act respectful and not outright disagree with the person that you're speaking with, or to let them know that you're uncomfortable. Also, make sure that you know, understand, and comply with your organization's rules. Your organization has policies against harassment and against discrimination. And many of the organizations have a code of conduct and ethics, which actually sets behavioral expectations in the workplace or while you are volunteering. So be aware of those and make sure that you review these policies. And if you have any questions regarding anything that you're reviewing, seek out your organization leaders. That's very important. Report violations or concerns of harassment and discrimination to your organization leader immediately. In a little bit, Mike is actually going to be discussing in detail how to report any concerns that you have. And finally, it is important that you align with your organization's commitment to act ethically during your volunteer experience. Mike, I'm going to turn it back over to you to share some additional tips.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, so just following up on what Tracy said, and some best practices for during your volunteer experience. It's okay to disagree with someone, but to do it respectfully and not to make it personal, but expressing a point of view. Again, there's that professional and respectful manner of doing that. Promoting inclusion, you play a role in that, to behave in such a way that everybody who you're engaging with in the organization feels included and welcome, and you're not excluding or treating people differently, be it based on some protected characteristic or other reason. Peer intervention, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide, but to the importance of you feeling both comfortable and knowing the organization's reporting procedure to intervene when confronted with this type of conduct, but also to feel comfortable intervening when you observe it, because your organization is committed to ensuring that any kind of harassing or discriminatory conduct doesn't occur and is not tolerated in the workplace. So next slide, Tracy. So if you observe some of the examples of any examples of the conduct that we've been talking about, given your organization's commitment to not tolerating it in the workplace, there are responses that you could engage. So for example, you can say, can you please stop that? You're making me uncomfortable. You can deflect. Let's get this conversation back on track, back to what we were talking about. You can direct your comments to one person to remove that person from the conversation, or again, switch topic to go to another meeting. But the point here is that your organization does not tolerate harassing or discriminatory conduct. And should you be confronted with it, you should feel comfortable saying something. It's not conduct that you have to both tolerate or endure during your volunteer experience. All right, next slide, Tracy. And towards that, your organization's commitment, there is a robust reporting process that the organization has to identify, to surface improper, inappropriate conduct, and put an end to it, remediate it, and prevent any recurrences. So on the next slide, we'll talk about the harassment and discrimination policy. There's your organization. So there is a statement that the conduct is illegal and will not be tolerated, a core organization value. There are multiple avenues to report inappropriate behavior that are available to you. It could be a manager, the executive director, a board member, or a third-party HR partner. And the multiple avenues reflect your organization's commitment to make sure that the conduct gets reported and gets bubbled up. So there are different avenues for you to utilize to report this conduct. There's a commitment to do a prompt, thorough investigation based on the concerns raised. There's a commitment to ensure confidentiality to the maximum extent possible. Only those with a business need to know about the concerns that are raised will be made aware of them. Very importantly, and I mentioned this earlier, there is no retaliation or no adverse action for reporting or participating in the organization's investigation, and the organization will take appropriate remedial action that will both punish the wrongdoer and ensure that no recurrences occur. So that's briefly your organization's harassment and discrimination policy that reflects the commitment to not tolerating any kind of conduct falling into this category. Okay. And lastly, your organization is committed to fostering a culture of respect and inclusion. So just a few reminders about behaviors for you that you could follow to ensure that this culture is present. One is being open to the needs, the interests, and the feelings of others. Embracing transparency and inclusion as core values. Your organization has embraced them, and you should certainly feel comfortable embracing these values as well, to seeing diversity as a strength. The expectation is that your organization will have a diversity of employees and volunteers, and everyone brings something different and something unique to the organization, which makes it a stronger, a better organization. Valuing each person regardless of role or identity. Everybody brings something different, equally valuable to the table, and to value each and every individual contribution. Being curious and open to others' experiences and perspectives. Everyone has something of value, some interesting or valuable information, unique knowledge, and that again contributes to the strength of the organization. So you should be open to hearing about it and incorporating it into your work. To question your assumptions before acting on them. You may have heard the term implicit bias, and there are deeply rooted, say, assumptions or beliefs you may have. And I think it's always a good practice to question yourself, to understand if there's any biases, unconscious, unintentional biases that you're bringing to the table. And then to view all interactions as an opportunity for building understanding and relationships. Every opportunity with another volunteer, with a leader in the organization, or anyone else, is an opportunity to understand more about the organization's mission, to learn from others, and it signals on your part a respect for those who you engage in on a regular basis. So again, these are all best practices that you should conduct yourself to further promote the culture of respect that your organization is committed to. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mike. This concludes our training session for preventing harassment and discrimination. Your organization will ask you to confirm that you've completed the training session. Please go ahead and follow the instructions provided by your organization. And mostly, if you have questions, please go ahead and submit your questions to an organization leader. Responses will be provided to your questions. So any questions that you have, feel free. Lastly, just thank you very much for listening today. And we welcome any future opportunities to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.